Scott is one of my best friends, super close, started his career early at Yahoo in sales. And I was like, you're not going to be selling here, right? You're an amazing operator. I am not, from a back office standpoint, et cetera, et cetera. You're amazing at kind of getting product on the right track. He's a great leader, but we're going to remove you from sales, right? And that took him a minute. He's like, I thought I'm great at sales. And I was like, you are, but not in this company. And so, those types of conversations actually enabled our success, and he would agree with that, right? Because it put him into certain lanes that made outsized impact that we needed him to do very early on in the company.
Welcome to How I Made It in Marketing from Marketing Sherpa. We scour pitches from hundreds of creative leaders and uncover specific examples, not just trending ideas or buzzword-laden schmaltz, real-world examples to help you transform yourself as a marketer. Now, here's your host, the Senior Director of Content and Marketing at Marketing Sherpa, Daniel Burstein, to tell you about today's guest.
If you think of what we do as marketers, we take value, real value that can help a person meet a goal or overcome a challenge, and then we package it up and message it so a customer can understand and receive it. But sometimes we focus too much on the way we want to package it and don't understand enough about the ways a person can really understand that value and the way they want to receive it. Think Blockbuster and Netflix. Same value, right? Netflix has just found a better way to package it, which is why I love this lesson from our next guest. Be passionate about the challenge you are trying to solve and not stubborn about the product solution. We'll hear that story, the story behind that lesson, and many more lesson-filled stories from Andrew Beranbom, the co-founder and CEO of FirstTube. Thanks for joining us, Andrew.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it.
So I looked through your YouTube, your LinkedIn, just so people understand who I'm talking to. Cherry picking a bit here. I know you worked with a lot of startups. Two of the most interesting ones that caught my eye, you started your career at Yahoo, where you were a senior product manager for Yahoo Travel, and you were the chief revenue officer of Bitly. But for the past 9 years, you've been the co-founder and CEO of FirstTube. So at FirstTube, you manage a team of 25, along with 75 freelancers. And FirstTube is a standalone company, and it is majority owned by Horizon Media, which is the largest U.S. media agency according to Ad Age Data Center 2022. Horizon has media investments of more than $9 billion. So, Andrew, give us a sense. What is your day like as founder and CEO of FirstTube?
Yeah, the day is never the same, in the sense that, we are a startup, working within a larger holding company, as you mentioned, with Horizon. And, my day kind of goes across everything from strategy, product design, as well as obviously sales and then obviously, of course, operations and kind of making sure our culture and everyone's humming together and we're having a good time while we're building a great company. And so, again, I think it runs the gamut on a daily basis. Of course, we operate ourselves what we refer to as our big three for the week. And so I pick the three things that are most important for me for the week. And I try to make sure I'm prioritizing those against all the other things and, kind of make sure I'm picking what's most important on a daily basis.
Yeah, I mean, that is one of the biggest challenges in marketing, really, in the industry, is prioritizing. Yeah. Well, let's talk about your big three lessons that you learned from the things you made. Because that's a great thing we get to do as marketers. We get to build things. I've never been an auditor, a podiatrist, but I don't feel like they walk away the day they actually build something. We build companies, we build brands, we build campaigns. Here's your first lesson. You said, I mentioned this in the open, be passionate about the challenge you are trying to solve and not stubborn about the product solution. How did you learn this lesson?
Yeah, I started, I was actually, my friend stopped by and asked me if I wanted to be a consultant for a program where it was my favorite band in the world, the Grateful Dead, was going through their 50th anniversary. And it was going to be these special 8 shows that were going to be performed, and my favorite guitarist, Trey Anastasio, was going to be the lead guitarist replacing Jerry Garcia. And they needed someone to run marketing. It was going to be a pay-per-view live streaming event. And it just sort of opened my mind. I was hearing all these complexities around the business and the opportunity of connecting live experiences with actually understanding the value of sponsors and all these things. And we really, as we did research, we saw this opportunity where experiences were not being able to be quantified by marketers. They were investing all this money in real life opportunities and experiential, And when you asked them if it worked, they had a hard time really, answering that question. And so we were incredibly focused on being able to answer that. Coming from the digital side my entire career, every single dollar that I invested, I knew exactly what was happening. And we saw this opportunity with kind of how social was, changing consumer behavior. There was going to be an opportunity to take what was happening in real life experience and translate that into content and then into a digital media format. And so we've been laser focused on that. It's for as you mentioned, 9 years. It's been about 7.5 years really focused on this idea once I landed on it. And it's amazing how fast that market is evolving, and we're still feeling like we're in the early stages of it.
Well, to kind of pay off this lesson, be passionate about the challenge you're trying to solve and not stubborn about the product solution. So it seems like we definitely, like, I used to work in the software industry, and I would see this with the software industry where they would, you want to sell software, it's very high margin, but then you realize, well, the customer isn't ready to use that software yet, right? They need help using it. They can't implement it. These are some of the reasons that they're not actually purchasing it. And so then you get services to come alongside it, and you get services to actually deliver that solution. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter to the customer that there's software involved. They're getting the solution. So what was it for you when you said, be passionate about the challenge you were trying to solve and not stubborn about the product
Yeah,
solution?
well, it's funny you kind of created the analogy to software. My background is in building more software-based businesses. Like, I'd see these complex business processes and we'd say, hey, there's an automation there. There's a business application to help marketers do things in a more, scalable, less expensive, all the values of SaaS that could be brought to the table. When we got into this opportunity, it didn't exist. And we were actually looking for the SaaS solution to be able to connect experiences with ROI. And we realized to actually do it and execute it was going to require all of not only our domain expertise around marketing and using the best of social media and native advertising and how to distribute out content to engage with audiences authentically, all the trends that have been working in marketing via social. We realized that when we were starting to talk to prospective clients, that we actually had to go in there full service. We had to bring in the technology around live streaming and production. We had to bring in our strategies and expertise on how to build audiences pre, live, and post to actually show those business results. And so, as someone who had an intention of never building an agency, I ended up following my passion around the idea of connecting these worlds and, had to round it out with quite a bit of services. And we still are doing that. We're actually finally, after about 7 years, have identified some products that we're starting to be able to invest and build in to round out, where we see the market going and the opportunity of bringing this to brands in a scalable way.
Yeah, we have this cohort, we call it the Mech Lab Super Funnel cohort, where we work with different startup companies and kind of give them advice on how to build their funnel. But I was talking of a very traditional industry, and they had a new patented solution that could help that industry be more efficient. I brought this lesson up too, because they're very focused on selling the physical product itself to this industry. And I brought up the fact that it's not the physical product itself, right? It's what does it do? It's a solution. It's that famous, nobody wants a quarter-inch drill, but they want a hole in the wall, where maybe you'd find more success is if you built the solution around it, you built the services team, you built the implementation, where the thing that they're saying yes to is not, okay, I can get this mechanical product, now I have to add it into my supply chain and my stream. You know what I mean? Where I got to figure that out now. What are all the problems and budget solutions and what friction and anxiety is involved there versus, hey, it's a done for you. We come in, we handle everything. You know what I mean? So it's much easier to say yes. So I think the lesson for anyone listening is not necessarily software services, whatever it is, but for any industry, you're delivering value. You're putting that in a package called a product or a service. I like what you said. Don't get so stubborn about what that solution is going to be. Be passionate about how to deliver that value. And it sounds like that's what you're going to do.
Definitely. It's, the passion behind our business, what you mentioned about, startups, they create things, they end up pivoting really quickly sometimes when they don't see that initial traction. This company, is my 5th startup. I'm so passionate about what live means to people, how it changes their lives. Live music, personally for me, has been a massive influence. And the idea of connecting live and how brands can be authentic, leveraging live to consumers, there's a value there that is completely untapped and growing. And so, we're so passionate about bringing that every day and that opportunity. And so, like I said, we still feel like we're just scratching the surfaces on it.
And then, as you said, it's figuring out how to package that up. Here's another lesson you said: make sure you are not too early. And I think that kind of ties in too, because if you are too early, either you're delivering the wrong value or the wrong product. So how did you learn this lesson?
Yeah, I've learned it a few times in my career, very specifically, I was co-founder earlier in my career. It was my first company that I co-founded. It started off being called Telepal and it got rebranded to Extol. When we created it as Telepal, we saw these, it was the very early stages of social media. We saw consumer behavior was starting to shift where consumers were getting information from their peers, from their friends, from their family, not directly just from a brand telling the consumer what they want to hear, right? So that was changing the entire shift of how consumers are getting information. And so we had a vision that referral marketing was going to go through this massive evolution. And we also saw this opportunity. Our backgrounds came from performance marketing, where we saw these economics where brands were very comfortable in buying a customer for a certain amount of CPA, right, a cost per acquisition. And the idea that they were sharing, I was seeing those economics being shared downward to publishers and affiliate partners, right? For me, I was very visible to understanding the quality of those acquisitions because I was coming from that world. And the idea that referral marketing was going to go through this shift, we saw it. It made sense. It looked beautiful in a PowerPoint pitch to the VCs, right? But consumer behavior doesn't kind of switch on a dime, right? And that was a big lesson that we learned. We were very, very early in the market. And as we tried to engage brands with it, getting them to even think about ripping and replacing out referral marketing technology and things that they had that were in their systems was a much bigger hurdle than we had ever anticipated, right? And the demand of the market to really, the pain that the brand was feeling, the classic, like, make sure you're selling drugs and not vitamins, right? That analogy rang true to us until the pain where they were actually realizing that the market was going to shift completely into social for consumer behavior, and they had to be there. It took time for that to happen. It took over 7 years. Now Extol is a very successful, referral marketing platform, and has realized that value as a business.
So what advice would you give to someone who's at a startup too early? Is there a way to pivot? Is there a way to use that loss to do something else with it? So, for example, I've written about, on the flip side, success of marketing or sales in a large organization. So when we have a success in a large organization, I think one mistake we make is we just have that success. We don't actually, create a case study or something or communicate it out to the big organization so everyone learns from it and we can build and build and build on that success. They talk about it from this is essentially from a loss perspective. You're there too early, right? It means that something's not working. But then what do you do next? Like, how can you learn from that to pivot with the company or to make your next move?
And I think there's kind of two scenarios there, and I've been through both of them. There's one where the market is there, it's just not going as fast as you anticipated, and there's one where the market is not here, right? This is not what I thought it was going to be as a business market opportunity. So if you think the market's not there, and if you think the market is there, right? To me, there's a couple of plays to be there. Either you need to figure out how you can accelerate that market, and that usually would require a significant amount of kind of venture capital, and that would make the decision to say, hey, I've got to go that VC route. I've got to go educate the market. I've got to go be the pioneer in this market and to your point, the case studies, the content, all the things to support accelerating the education so that the market understands that opportunity. Because if they do, then the market will unlock. The other situation is, I thought that this was a real pain point and it's not. And in that case, you kind of have to look inward to see what did you learn? Right. And so are there some key nuggets there of a business opportunity where you could take some of what you have invested in and leverage it somewhere else? Or do you say, hey, you lick your chops and move on? Right. I think those are kind of the two scenarios that I've seen with being early.
That's great. The first one is great. That's kind of our job as marketers, right? It goes back to the Henry Ford quote, the If I asked what people wanted, they would have said a faster
Yeah.
horse. But you know, the second one, here's one thing I've noticed with the startup. The second one is you learn that once you start to sell, right? So when you have that idea out there, when you're talking to just potential investors, potential partners, everything, I've learned sometimes it's very hard for them to give you that negative feedback, right? People, it's just human nature. They tend to want to be encouraging, or sometimes for founders, we just want to grab onto the yeses. Like even if we hear the 9 no's, we'll kind of grab on and feel his yeses. But then it becomes very different to your point when you're like, oh, okay, now I actually have to go in and sell this. And then you see that pain point is very big and important to you because you're selling this. And yeah, it's a pain point to who you're trying to sell to, but it's like pain point number 9.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's just not that pressing.
Exactly. That's back to just like, you don't want to be in that business of selling a vitamin for not the 9th pain point of a marketer, right? That's not going to be very successful. I think a lot of that has to go with kind of, again, I do listen. I do want to hear those yeses, right? As an early stage entrepreneur and building business, but I actually try to hear the no's more than anything, right? Because a lot of time, like when I got into the first tube and we were cracking the code in music and leveraging talent and music rights and all these things, everyone was like, there's no way you're going to get people to do that. There's no way you're going to get the rights cleared to do that. And for me, I was like, that's an opportunity. Right. I know that there's a way to do that because if I could bring branded video content dollars, that is one of the fastest growing parts of the digital ecosystem, to the music industry, they're going to listen. Right. If you can do it in a smart, scalable way. And so sometimes the no's are the nugget, of kind of, saying, hey, I've actually got something here. Right. I think, again, you got to be able to kind of early on, especially, you got to listen to both and see if there's an opportunity.
And I think that also takes who you're talking to closest to you. And you mentioned select your co-founders wisely. So this sounds kind of like a hard-fought lesson, like maybe you learned this in a painful way?
Yeah, I've built a few businesses and some of them, there's a lot of lessons to kind of choosing your co-founders. I got brought in to an idea and of course I don't want to name any names here to protect everyone. But, I got brought in by somebody that I didn't know so well. I got hung up on the idea and not really the person as much. I didn't know the person very well. And I brought in a person to be the third kind of CTO to a business who I had worked with for many, many years. We had an incredible relationship, both personally and professionally. The connection between the person that had brought me in and the CTO was oil and water, in a simple way of explaining it. And, it starts with the people, right? When you're building a business, it's like getting married. And so, you're going to go through 95% rough times to get to the 5% of good times, and kind of, I didn't choose wisely in the sense of the connection between the two of them. And that caused us to, have a pretty rough go at it. And we had to course correct out of that.
Yeah. So you mentioned a marriage, and I think in this case it ended in a divorce, but, can you think of a time where, how you settle maybe one of those contentious disputes with co-founders? So, like I said, unfortunately, this ended in a divorce, but like I'll give you an example. I've written about, company and product naming before, right? And something that always comes up in company and product naming, they're the folks that want to take the professional route, the professional marketing route. And then the folks are just shooting from the hip and they've got that idea. And when it comes to something like, the name of the company or the name of the product, I mean, that's kind of core to something everyone's involved in. Everyone can have an opinion on whether that's your expertise or not. So have you learned anything, relationship counseling, relationship management way, go off and, hold hands and get dinner, go for a long walk on the beach? Like, what do you do when it comes down to those difficult decisions where it doesn't really come down to a specific individual's expertise per se. It comes down to something anyone can have a voice to, which is what marketing is sometimes. Everyone's got an idea for marketing, even if they're not a professional.
Yeah, I think, from dealing with the contentions, I think, I think, being brutally honest and having, being brutally candid with your co-founders, you need to be able to have that relationship and be able to have hard conversations. And I think that's one very important thing. And I think, in that situation that I mentioned, it ended up where the person that brought me in, we ended up having to remove him from the organization because really the engine of the business, the success of the business, was coming from my kind of enablement around sales and productization and things like that. and ideas. And obviously the technology officer was really important in building the products as fast as we could. We had a fiscal responsibility from our investors that we took money from, to make sure that we delivered against the business itself. And so you got to be able to take the personal out of it, and that's always a challenge for people. I've gotten a lot better at it over 25 years, where I think I was very emotional in some of the earlier stages of my things. Have been I'd say one of the biggest things I've been able to grow and evolve on is really be able to kind of bifurcate between kind of something that's personal and something that's business oriented, right? And some of that is after you have a tough conversation, to go do something that's outside of work, right? And I think that is one of the things that I've tried to do, is when I've had to have hard conversations with people, or have a hard conversation with me, it's like, let's go take ourselves out of this environment and have that human connection to kind of set us back and reset us. As I move forward with kind of co-founders, my co-founders today, Ian and Scott, as we started our foundation. Scott, I've known for 20 plus years. We both started our careers earlier at Yahoo. We wanted to build a company together. It didn't happen for a long time. And then as I started to get some traction with First Tube, I brought Scott in very early. And my other co-founder, Ian, what we did very early on is kind of recognize what our strongest skill sets were for building this business, and really just try to define some lanes, because to your point, everyone's a marketer, everyone can have an idea. We want to build that opportunity for feedback and people to feel comfortable to go in those things. But there's also an opportunity cost if people aren't in the right lanes to move the business forward, especially in those very early stages, so that you can get to the point of all the things you're dreaming about doing, right? And building a company and growing revenue and growing people and making an impact in the market. And so that was kind of one of the key things that we set off and had a really kind of candid conversation. Like, Scott is, one of my best friends, super close, started his career early at Yahoo in sales. And I was like, you're not going to be selling here, right? You're an amazing operator. I am not, from a back office standpoint, et cetera, et cetera. You're amazing at kind of, getting product on the right track. He's a great leader, but we're going to remove you from sales, right? And that took him a minute. He's like, I thought I'm great at sales. And I was like, you are, but not in this company. And so, those types of conversations actually enabled our success, and he would agree with that, right? Because it put him into certain lanes that made outsized impact that we needed him to do very early on in the company.
Yeah, so let's talk about your co-founders in just a bit. So, the first half of the podcast, we talk about lessons from the things we made. The second half, we talk about lessons from people we collaborated with. But first, let me mention that the How I Made It in Marketing podcast is underwritten by MECLAB's Institute, the parent organization of Marketing Sherpa. To learn how MECLAB services can help you get better business results from deeper customer understanding, visit meclabs.com/results. But so yeah, let's talk about your co-founders. You said embrace each person's strengths and align on an execution plan. So to use kind of maybe an analogy from your universe, right? So when you're setting out to found a company, is it like building a band? Is it like, hey, we can't have 5 drummers, right? I mean, maybe a really interesting band with 5 drummers. We can't have 5 drummers, right? Like, is that you're looking for, like, okay, who's the guitar player, who's the bass player, who's the singer, who's the drummer? Is that what you're looking for when you're kind of putting that team together of co-founders?
Well, as the kind of the, again, we're co-founders. I started the company a little bit before those guys joined on, and that's exactly the headspace that I have when I'm looking for people. I'm looking to understand the things that I'm weakest at, right, and complementing myself to actually build a business. In some of my earlier stages of entrepreneurship, as a younger man, you kind of think that you might have all the answers for things because you kind of were early in the market. You're excited about the idea. And I think one of the biggest things is to recognize where your strengths are not there. And that goes both ways. And if you can do that correctly, it really works because kind of the 1 + 1 = 3 kind of dynamic can happen there. And that to me is one of the biggest lessons that I've had over time. When you overlap with someone on like the same skill sets, the same mindsets, it's almost like our world now, right? Where everyone's made a lot of comments around echo chambers that you've built in social media, and you get influenced by people that are like-minded to you. And you're like, oh yeah, we think the same politics, we think the same sports, yada, yada, yada. This is all great. That is not good in business. For me in business, it's about being able to have these kind of, collaborators that are completely different. And that's actually been the beauty of, I think, First Tube success is like we're a combination of filmmakers who come from completely like backgrounds of building documentaries and film, all the way to technologists like and marketers and music expertise like Ian, who came from the music industry for a long time. Andy Cohn, who leads our sales. He was the lead president of the Fader publisher. One of in the emerging artist music space for a long time. We all come from different spaces, and together we've really built this really interesting kind of business that I don't think would have ever happened if it wasn't these types of people coming together.
Well, yes, you mentioned other people beyond the co-founders, yep. So that brings me to the question of when do you know that you have to bring in, outsiders, those first hires, those vendors. So, for example, I interviewed on the How I Made It Marketing podcast Justin Herber, the CMO and Chief Brand Officer of Tractor Beverage Company. And one of his lessons was own your role in the relationship. And he talked about how he was brought into Tom's and founder Blake McCoskey because they needed a specific role for him. They needed kind of that creative person that could execute with, documentaries and different creative on the ideas that the founder had. So for you, how do you know when do you bring in that you've got that tight-knit team of co-founders? It's almost like you don't want to bring in Yoko, right? Like when do you bring in those first new hires, those vendors?
Yeah. I think the vendor piece is not really where, we play as much. We've always gone, I still, in my business mentality of how we're building things, we do try to come in this full service framework. When we do identify a vendor opportunity, for example, it might be where we're trying to do things in an innovation space where we haven't done them yet. And we want to go do a proof of concept like we did with one of our clients for Grey Goose last summer. We did this big hybrid experience on the rooftop, actually here in New York in Pier 17. And we tried a mixed reality concept that we hadn't ever done before. And so we wanted to partner with a vendor in that situation so we could learn and see if it works and all those types of things from a building a company standpoint and like identifying like the right team members. I think it goes across a few different things. Obviously, in the early stages, you're pretty revenue focused, especially in our situation. Scott and I self-funded this business throughout its lifespan. And so it was a different kind of trajectory than I had in my past, where it was heavily VC-backed businesses, right? Where we were kind of like going after a market, creating a market, hiring a sales team, push and making that happen. And so in this situation, it was actually always trying to identify one, culturally was really one of the most important things, trying to find alignment on culture, finding like-minded people that are passionate, are open to being part of kind of a very innovative wall. In my situation, I came from the digital side and not from the experiential side. So, I was pretty, I'd say, less educated about the kind of the history and the traditional learnings of experiential marketing. I think some of that was good, because I was coming in it with a new way of doing things, a new innovative way. But as we went to an operational scale, and suddenly we were operating things that required a deep domain expertise around actually building events and experiences, I brought in actually it's a colleague who's actually a childhood friend of mine, but he kind of behaves as our head of our agency, Howie Rubin, who built his own experiential marketing agency called Match. And so, we had found that inflection point where it was like, hey, we need this expertise in-house, right? We don't have this. Scott and I didn't have it. Ian came deep from, music, concert production and music industry, but not from building these massive experiential environments. And so we went out and found that right person.
All right, let's take a look at another lesson from someone you work with. You mentioned focus on the value to the consumer, and you learned this from Brian Acton, the co-founder of WhatsApp, when you two were working in Yahoo together. So how did you learn this from Brian?
Yeah, so Brian's a pretty well-documented entrepreneur. He built this small little application called WhatsApp with another co-founder, Yoram, and those guys are folks that I met when I was just 22 years old. They had math. They probably don't even realize this, but as being an early employee to Yahoo is one kind of, I call it my MBA in the internet, but I getting to hang out with Brian all the time. We were building the first versions of Yahoo Shopping actually, and he was the lead engineer on it. And I was constantly going to Brian with all kinds of ways to make, drive higher transactions or drive, more commerce, more ideas of driving more revenue for Yahoo. And Brian always put the consumer first every single time. he would say no to me 95% of the time. And it's fascinating to watch his trajectory. He built WhatsApp, sold it for $19 billion to Facebook, and actually quit, right? Facebook, because they were changing the strategy around WhatsApp and making it more commercial to a detriment to the consumer. And it was amazing for me to watch, over a lifespan of 15 years, that early lesson that I got when I was 22, where he was just obsessed with the consumer experience, obsessed with the value of the consumer. He held that all the way through and probably walked away from some money that would change a lot of people's lives. And so that obsession with the consumer has always rang true to me. And I always, even in any marketing application, and I think even more so when you start thinking about the paradigm shifts that have happened with brands and consumers now, if you're not thinking about both sides of the table, right, you are not going to build something that's going to end up having longevity and scale. So, in our ecosystem at First Two, we think of, there's a talent side of the equation that we're always engaging with. There's brands, and then there's also consumers. And we really map out how the three are all benefiting from a relationship and a solution that we're going to bring to market. When you do that, everyone leans in and magic can happen, right? Actually, things that you would never even expect would happen, right? And so in a very transactional space between brands and talent, we actually could find, if you find those right synergies, that they care about things that are aligned together, that's just one example where it actually brings a better benefit to the consumer, right? And so that lesson from Brian is always something that rings back in my head every single time I'm thinking about something.
So when I hear that, or maybe when the listeners hear that focus on consumer value, I don't think anyone would disagree, but I think where the rubber meets the road, it's really difficult,
sure,
right? So I wonder if you had any ideas or tips on how to actually do that. One thing that came to mind for me is creating a value proposition. Like when the company leaders have to sit down and create a value proposition, it always gives something someone can look back and reference and tie into, like, hey, this is our value proposition, because it has to focus on an ideal customer. And even if you're listening and you can't create the primary value proposition for the company, even if you create a prospect level value proposition for the customer set you own, or a product level value proposition for the product you own, or a prospect level value proposition for the landing page you have to create, right? That value proposition kind of forces you to focus on the customer. So for you, I think we all agree, focus on customer value. But when things get difficult, when we get hot, when we get some of these heated meetings, some of the meetings with maybe co-founders, with investors, with management, any tips you've learned on how to actually stand up for that customer?
Yeah, for me, it's just being authentic. Every time even my own lessons of life, anytime I tried not to be authentic with anything that I'm trying to do, things would end up in not the way I would hope, and I think that correlates to, whether you're a creator and you're on that side of the fence, or if you're a brand, or if you're a consumer, you want to build that kind of authenticity, around your value proposition that you mentioned, that actually, of course we're here to drive business and drive commercial value. But if you can thread that with remaining authentic and kind of, your outcomes will be stronger. And I think you'll get it right more than you'll get it wrong.
Okay. Another lesson you had, which ties into focusing on the customer, you said, create a charter program with 3 to 5 key early adopter customers. And you learned this from working with Brad Klaus, a serial entrepreneur who was at Trinity Capital at the time. How did you learn this from Brad?
Yeah, that was, we talked about it a little bit earlier around when there is that market opportunity, but you're a little early, right? You validated that there's actually this big multi-billion-dollar space here. All the things are pointing in the right direction for a real business opportunity. But, when you're early and you want to be able to kind of test and learn and validate certain things, Brad we were taking the Telepel idea, and that's when it turned into Extol. And I partnered with Brad, and he taught me a ton of lessons in how to grow and operate businesses. But this kind of go-to-market strategy where, again, you can build back to that authentic dynamic that I just mentioned. Charter programs is about building an authentic relationship between your prospective clients and your technology team and your product team, so that there could be this open line of feedback so that you can actually get it right. Right. And so if you just go right and build a product and send it out to market, and you hope and that it's all going to work, and you don't get all that feedback loop, you're never going to be able to iterate and be agile enough to actually create the product that's going to become, that could scale and drive massive value. And so, Brad kind of taught me this way of kind of, launching a charter program. There were kind of three key things that he had me focus on. One is kind of defining that give get to ensure you can clearly define the value of the customer to the customer partner and you, right? So like, hey, you're willing to try my product early. Why are you doing this? What do you want to get out of it by being really early into the space? And kind of making sure that balance is there. The second is kind of ensuring and defining what success is for the business and the customer, right? For the program. So you both make sure that you're walking away happy, or if you don't, what do you need to get to that point? I think if you don't define that success out of the gates, you kind of, you can end that relationship pretty quickly, right? Because the goal here is that you're using a charter program to onboard a client earlier than probably you would be able to in a normal kind of stage of your product. And you're opening the doors to being like, hey, you can impact this product that you can't develop in-house. You know that you can't develop in-house, costs you too much money. You don't have the resources, et cetera, et cetera. But if we do get it right for you, it's going to exponentially impact you, right? And we want to get that product, so we're going to then go bring it to the masses. And so, really kind of defining that success metric is super key. And the last is that feedback loop, right? Is like making sure that you're setting up a cadence where the client, not brand per se, any client, is being able to get that feedback right to the people that are actually building and creating the products, right? So making sure you're getting the sales team out of the way, getting the client success people out of the way, how to build this cadence of interaction so that the product and the technology team have direct access to the clients will really get away from the kind of telephone game of feedback and gets the real meat to it. And that allows you to get the product to the right place faster. Right. And so, and again, this allows you to enter a market with a product that's maybe in its beta phase, right? Get all that feedback loop. And then it allows you to have some of your probably most loyal customers you ever have, right? Because you've ended up taking the relationship beyond the kind of commercial transactional piece, but you become partners if you do it correctly. And that is a really great foundation and a big lesson I learned from Brad, and I use it for everything I do. We're getting set to launch a new product here at First Tube, our first product that we're very excited about in the next kind of month and a half. And that's exactly what I'm planning on doing, is kind of bringing on a few charter clients that we can be super candid with, right? And that allows you to succeed.
So I love that idea. I mean, that's really being customer first and building a better product. But is there anything you could learn from those early charter clients to help with your marketing, like the words they're using, their journey? Like when I talk about, I've written about, building a marketing funnel strategy. And sometimes with the marketing funnel strategy, we're so focused on the technology, we're using the automation, or we're focused on cost per click or the keywords we're buying. But really, we should be focused first on, as a human being, they take a certain journey, whether B2B or B2C, to get to our product, and how can our marketing funnel strategy map that and really learn about them on a human level. So when you're dealing with those charter customers, what are you listening to from them? What are you hearing from them that's going to inform your marketing strategy, not just the actual product?
I think the from a marketing strategy standpoint, again, I think you're trying to figure out what are their true pains, right? If you can figure out what their true pains are, you can invert that into how you're going to actually do the product marketing around your offering, and so. And then where did the happiness come? Like, where was that aha, right? So if there's a key understanding, for us, for example, with the charter program I did with Brad around Extol, we're introducing this new kind of consumer to consumer referral marketing platform, right? That could, start building the relationships tree between their existing customers and their friend network, and then the behaviors that could go down through that, so that they can understand the influence value of certain customers, right? So if you have 10,000 customers that are referring, there are 100 of them that actually really were these passionate, call them ambassadors of your brand. And so this was a way of using data to identify ambassadors. We would never have even thought of that if our client didn't tell us that. So we then pivoted that, right, to the value was, we were very performance marketing driven, right? Hey, if you're willing to pay $50 for a Netflix acquisition, why don't we build a way to use this in a new marketing channel, what we actually realized is that the identification of like your best passionate customers can happen through this application, right? And that value was something that we uncovered through Charter, and then we used that in product marketing, right? And it drove even further value and adoption perception when we went out, and turned on the hose for it.
That's great. Let the customer teach you. I like it. Find where the happiness is. I like that. So we talked about many different things about what it means to be a marketer. What are the key qualities of an effective marketer?
Well, all I think about right now, and I've had a conversation with the chief digital officer, strategy officer here at Horizon about it quite a bit. Donnie Williams. We like to sit back and sometimes talk just about macro parts of marketing and the challenges that everyone's facing. And he's like, what you guys solve more than ever is that you just make brands relevant. And that relevancy challenge is I think really interesting, kind of bar to set. I think with all the noise, all the fragmentation of consumers, all the different types of choices of way that they can, spend their time across Netflix, Roblox, TikTok, you name it, right? There's the attention challenge is greater than ever. And I think, what a marketer needs to think about is that kind of that relevancy, right? Of how do they be relevant to their audiences is kind of where we really think about it on a day-to-day basis, and really, I think is a challenge for everyone, right? It used to, it's the kind of the next, everyone's talking about the value of attention. We actually succeed in creating quite a bit of attention of a consumer on how we actually deliver our programming, right? I'll get somewhere around 15 minutes of someone's attention around my programming, right? You compare that to a 30-second ad, the attention's there. But really, without the relevance of why the consumer is watching for 15 minutes, if you don't nail that, if the talent's not right, if the experience is not right, if the message is not right, all those things need to come together to really drive the impact for what a brand's doing. And so I challenge ourselves to make sure that kind of the right relevancy is there for a marketer, the right culture that they're choosing, right? There's so many things to input to get it right. And I think that's kind of my aspiration. Sometimes we're getting it right. Sometimes we're learning from it,
Well, thanks for your time, Andrew. Hopefully we kept everyone's attention, our marketer's attention.
There you go. There you go,
so thanks for your time, Andrew.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the combo.
Thanks everyone for listening.
Thank you for joining us for How I Made It in Marketing with Daniel Burstein. Now that you've gotten inspiration for transforming yourself as a marketer, get some ideas for your next marketing campaign from Marketing Sherpa's extensive library of free case studies at marketingsherpa.com. That's marketingsherpa.com.